The hunting party's armor arrived at dawn, but the hunters did not. 12 sets of leather and bone, stacked carefully at the edge of the forest where the great pines met the grasslands. No blood stained them. No tears marked the hides. They were simply there, arranged like an offering, with a single wolf's tooth placed atop the pile. The tooth was massive, ancient, yellowed with age. And carved into its surface was a symbol no one in the Riverstone pack had seen in 3 generations. The mark of the forgotten. Davrik, the pack's elder council leader, stood before the armor as the morning mist curled around his feet. His gray beard touched his chest, and his eyes, still sharp despite his 70 winters, studied the tooth with growing unease. Around him, wolves in their human forms gathered, some still rubbing sleep from their eyes, others already shifting nervously from foot to foot. "Where are they?" someone whispered. "Where are our hunters?" Another voice called, louder now, edged with panic. Davrik raised his weathered hand for silence. The crowd obeyed, though fear rippled through them like wine through wheat. 12 hunters. The pack's finest. Warriors who had defended their territory for decades, who had driven off rival packs and hunted the great elk in the northern ranges. Gone. "This is her doing," said Torvin, stepping forward from the crowd. He was young for a war leader, barely 40, with shoulders broad as a boulder and scars crossing his arms like river tributaries. His voice carried the weight of command. "The Omega in the Whispering Valleys. She has taken them." Murmur spread through the gathering. The Omega. They spoke her name like a curse, though most had never seen her. Rumors painted her as a ghost, a phantom who lived alone in the valleys where even the bravest hunters feared to tread. An Omega wolf with no pack, no family, no allegiance to any territory. Such wolves were meant to be weak, submissive, lowest in the natural order. But this one was different. She had killed before. "We sent 12 warriors," Torvin continued, his jaw tight. 12 of our best. We gave them silver blades and ashwood spears. We blessed them with the old prayers. They were to bring her back alive, to answer for the 3 scouts she killed last autumn. And instead, she sends us their armor, Davrik said quietly, lifting the wolf's tooth between his fingers. "And a warning." "What warning?" a young woman asked. Her name was Nessa, a scout barely 20 winters, with quick eyes and quicker feet. "What does the tooth mean?" Davrik turned the tooth slowly in the early light. The carved symbol seemed to dance in the shadows, 3 circles interlocked, with a single line cutting through them all. "It means we have awakened something we should have left sleeping. This is the mark of the old bloodlines, the ones who walked before the great packs formed. The forgotten ones. Those who chose solitude over society, who refused the pack bonds." "Legends," Torvin scoffed, though his voice lacked certainty. "Stories to frighten children." "Legends that just sent back 12 sets of armor," Davrik replied, his tone sharp as winter ice. "Without a drop of blood. Without their owners." The crowd pressed closer now, and Davrik could smell their anxiety, sharp and metallic. Pack wolves were not meant to face the unknown alone. They drew strength from each other, from the bonds that tied them together like roots beneath an ancient tree. But this Omega, this creature in the valleys, she had no such bonds. And somehow, that made her more dangerous than any enemy they had ever faced. "What do we do?" Nessa asked. Others echoed her question, voices rising in a chorus of confusion and fear. Davrik looked at the armor again, at the careful way it had been stacked, almost respectful. Almost mocking. He thought of the 12 warriors, men and women who had left 3 days ago with fire in their eyes and certainty in their steps. He thought of their families, now standing in this crowd, faces pale as birch bark. "We wait," he said finally. "Wait." Torvind's voice exploded across the clearing. "Our people are missing, perhaps dead, and you counsel waiting?" "I counsel wisdom," Davrik shot back, meeting the war leader's eyes without flinching. "We sent 12. They did not return. If we send more, we simply give her more armor to stack." "Then what?" Torvind demanded. "We let an Omega mock us? We let her kill our hunters without answer?" Davrik was quiet for a long moment, turning the tooth over and over in his palm. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the mist, revealing the forest edge in stark detail. Somewhere beyond those trees, in valleys most of them had never seen, lived a wolf who had done the impossible. An Omega who hunted hunters. "We need to understand what we face," Davrik said at last. "We need to know who she is, why she lives alone, why she kills those who come for her. We need answers before we act." "And who will get these answers?" Torvind asked, his voice dripping with challenge. Davrik smiled, though there was no humor in it. "Someone she won't expect. Someone small enough to slip past her defenses, smart enough to watch without being seen." He turned to Nessa, whose eyes went wide as moons. "No," she breathed. "Elder, I'm just a scout." "I'm not." "You're perfect," Davrik interrupted gently. "You can move through the forest like mist. You know how to read tracks, how to observe without interfering. And most importantly, you're not a warrior. You're not a threat." "She killed 3 scouts last autumn," Nessa protested, her voice climbing. "How am I not a threat?" "Those scouts were part of a war party," Davrik said. "They carried weapons and ill intent. You will carry only your eyes and ears. You will not hunt her, Nessa. You will simply watch. Learn. And return to tell us what you find." The young scout looked around at the gathered pack, at faces both hopeful and terrified, at the pile of armor that represented everything they feared. She was afraid. Of course she was afraid. But she was also pack, and the pack needed her. "When do I leave?" she asked quietly. "Before the sun reaches its peak," Davrik said. "Travel light. Take no weapons." "And Nessa?" He placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm but kind. "Remember, you are not there to confront her. You are there to understand her. There is a difference, and it may save your life." Nessa nodded, her throat too tight for words. As the crowd began to disperse, whispering among themselves, Davrik remained by the armor, still holding the ancient tooth. Torvind lingered as well, his expression dark. "You're making a mistake," the war leader said. "Sending a child when we should be sending an army." "An army is what started this," Davrik replied. "Perhaps it's time we tried something different." "And if she kills the girl?" Davrik didn't answer immediately. He placed the tooth carefully back atop the armor pile, positioning it just so, as if it were an offering to gods who no longer listened. "Then we will have our answer," he said softly. "And we will know that what lives in those valleys cannot be reasoned with, cannot be understood. Only feared." Torvind grunted and walked away, his heavy footsteps crushing the grass. Davrik stood alone now, watching the forest edge as morning turned to day. Somewhere in those shadows, beyond the reach of pack law and pack safety, lived a wolf who had broken every rule they knew. An Omega who should have been weak but was somehow strong. A lone wolf who had bested 12 hunters without breaking them, only dismissing them like children who had wandered too far from home. Who was she? What made her different? And most terrifying of all, what would she do next? The questions hung in the air like smoke, unanswered, as Davrik finally turned and walked back to the village. Behind him, the armor remained, a silent testament to the power of the creature they had underestimated. The Omega in the Whispering Valleys. Her name was Brenna, though Davrik didn't know it yet. And her story was about to change everything. Nessa left at midday, as the sun hung like a copper coin in the pale sky. She wore simple traveling clothes, soft leather that wouldn't rustle against branches, and carried only a water skin and a small pouch of dried meat and berries. No weapons. No armor. Nothing that would mark her as a warrior. The pack had gathered to see her off, though their farewell was quiet, subdued. Her mother pressed a small charm into her hand, a carved wooden wolf that had been passed down through 4 generations. Her father said nothing, only pulled her close for a moment before releasing her. She could feel his fear like heat from a fire. Torvin stood apart from the others, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. But as Nessa passed him on her way to the forest edge, he spoke low enough that only she could hear. "If you find her," he said, "and if you get the chance, remember where her throat is." Nessa didn't reply, didn't even look at him. She simply walked on, her feet carrying her toward the trees that had swallowed 12 hunters and returned only their armor. The forest at the edge of Riverstone territory was familiar enough. Nessa had scouted these paths 100 times, knew every game trail and water source. But as she moved deeper, following the route the hunting party had taken 3 days before, the character of the woods began to change. The trees grew taller, their trunks thicker, their roots twisting across the ground like serpents. The underbrush became denser, harder to navigate. And the sounds changed too. The familiar chatter of squirrels and birds faded, replaced by a silence so complete it felt like walking through a held breath. She found the hunting party's trail easily enough. 12 wolves moving together left signs even a child could follow. Broken branches, disturbed earth, scent marks still faintly lingering on the bark of trees. Nessa followed these signs like a thread through a maze, moving quietly, pausing often to listen. By evening of the first day, she reached the place where the trail ended. It was a clearing, small and unremarkable, carpeted with moss and ringed by ancient oaks. But here, the signs of the hunting party simply stopped. No struggle. No blood. No bodies. The tracks just vanished, as if the 12 hunters had been plucked from the earth by invisible hands. Nessa circled the clearing 3 times, searching for any clue she might have missed. Nothing. It was as if the hunters had simply ceased to exist in this spot. She made camp at the clearing's edge, not daring to sleep in its center. As darkness fell, she sat with her back against a broad oak, eating a small portion of her dried meat and listening to the forest night. And that's when she heard it. Singing. It came from deeper in the valley, a woman's voice, clear and haunting. Not words, exactly, but a melody that seemed to weave through the trees like smoke. It rose and fell, sometimes barely a whisper, sometimes strong enough to shake the leaves. Nessa's breath caught. She had never heard anything like it. The song was beautiful, yes, but also strange, otherworldly. It made her skin prickle and her heart beat faster. It made her want to run toward it and away from it at the same time. She forced herself to stay still, to breathe slowly, to think. This had to be her. The Omega. Brenna, if the old rumors held any truth. She was close. When the singing finally faded, replaced by the normal sounds of night insects and distant owls, Nessa allowed herself to sleep, though it was a shallow, restless sleep filled with dreams of voices calling her name. She woke before dawn and continued deeper into the valley. The second day was harder. The terrain grew rougher, the path less clear. Nessa had to shift into her wolf form several times to navigate steep slopes and cross rushing streams swollen with snowmelt. Her wolf was small for her age, russet-colored with white paws, built for speed rather than strength. But she was nimble, and that served her well here. By afternoon, she found the first sign of habitation. A shelter, woven from branches and covered with moss, so well hidden that Nessa almost walked past it. She approached cautiously, every sense alert, but the shelter was empty. Inside, she found evidence of regular use, a bed of dried grass, still fresh, a fire pit with cold ashes, and along one wall, a row of objects that made her stomach clench. Bones. Not human or wolf bones, but the bones of prey. Deer, elk, even what looked like a young bear. They were arranged carefully, almost reverently, each skull placed at a specific angle, each set of ribs stacked just so. It was like a shrine, or a warning, or both. Nessa backed out of the shelter, her heart pounding. She continued on, moving more carefully now, aware that she was in the Omega's territory, in her hunting grounds. And then, just as the sun began to sink toward the western hills, she saw her. Brenna stood in a stream, the water rushing around her knees. She was in her human form, tall and lean, with dark hair that fell past her shoulders in wild tangles. Her skin was bronzed from sun and marked with scars, white lines that crossed her arms and back like a map of battles. She wore simple clothes, leather pants and a loose tunic, both worn but clean. But it was her face that held Nessa frozen. Beautiful, yes, but fierce. Angular and sharp, with high cheekbones and a straight nose. Her eyes were the color of amber and firelight, and they held a quality Nessa had never seen in a wolf's gaze before, absolute self-possession. No submission. No fear. No need for approval or acceptance. She looked like a wolf who had never, not for one moment, doubted her right to exist exactly as she was. Brenna bent and pulled something from the stream, a large fish, silver and thrashing. She killed it with a quick motion, then straightened, water streaming from her legs, and looked directly at Nessa. Their eyes met across 40 paces of forest. Nessa's breath stopped. She hadn't made a sound, hadn't moved, had stayed downwind. How had the Omega known she was there? For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. Nessa felt pinned by that amber gaze, unable to move, unable to think. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to shift and flee back to the safety of her pack. But she didn't. She held still, held that gaze, and silently communicated what Davrik had told her to communicate. I am not a threat. I am only watching. Brenna tilted her head slightly, studying her. Then, without warning, she smiled. It was a small smile, barely a curve of her lips, but it transformed her face from fierce to something else. Something almost amused. You're from the Riverstone pack, Brenna called out, her voice carrying easily across the distance. It was the same voice Nessa had heard singing the night before, rich and clear. You have their smell. Pine sap and river stones. Nessa swallowed hard, finding her voice. I am. And you've come to watch me, Brenna continued, turning back to her fish, beginning to clean it with a small knife. To observe and report. To learn what the terrible Omega does in her valley. Yes, Nessa admitted. There seemed little point in lying. Brenna laughed, a sound like water over rocks. At least you're honest. More honest than the 12 who came before you. What did you do to them? The question burst out before Nessa could stop it. Brenna paused in her work, her hands still. I sent them home. Their armor came back, but they didn't. No, Brenna agreed, resuming her cleaning. They went home a different way. A longer path. They'll arrive eventually, confused and humbled but alive. I don't kill unless I must. You killed 3 of our scouts last autumn. Now Brenna looked up again, and her expression had hardened. Your scouts attacked me while I slept. They came with blades and intent to capture. I defended myself. That is not murder. That is survival. Nessa had no answer to that. The official story in the pack had been that the scouts were ambushed, killed without provocation. But looking at Brenna now, seeing the scars that marked her body, Nessa wondered if the official story had been the whole truth. Why do you live alone? Nessa asked, emboldened by Brenna's willingness to talk. Wolves need packs. We're not meant to be solitary. No, Brenna said softly, her eyes distant. You're not. But I am. She finished cleaning the fish and began walking toward the bank, toward Nessa. The young scout tensed, ready to run, but Brenna's movements were casual, unhurried. She climbed out of the stream and sat on a flat rock, the fish laid across her lap. You're afraid of me, Brenna observed. But you came anyway. That takes courage. My pack needs answers, Nessa said, trying to keep her voice steady. They sent you 12 hunters. You returned their armor. They don't understand. Don't they? Brenna's amber eyes locked on hers. They send warriors to capture an Omega, to drag her back to their territory and force her to submit to their laws, their hierarchy. And when she refuses, when she shows them she will not be taken, they claim not to understand. I think they understand perfectly. They simply don't like the answer. Why do you refuse? Nessa asked. Why live out here, alone, when you could have a pack, a family, protection? Brenna was quiet for a long time, her fingers absently tracing the scales of the dead fish. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Because I was born to a pack once. Because I lived under their laws and their hierarchy. Because I was an Omega there too, the lowest, the one everyone could command and control. And because when I finally found my voice, when I finally stood up and said no, they tried to kill me for it. Nessa felt her chest tighten. Your birth pack? The Northern Ridge pack, Brenna said, and there was old pain in her voice, old rage. I was born Omega there, lowest of low. They used me as a servant, a scapegoat, someone to blame when things went wrong. I accepted it for 20 years because that's what I was taught. Accept. Submit. Obey. What changed? Brenna looked up at the sky, at the first stars beginning to appear. My sister. Her name was Marin. She was Beta-born, strong and beautiful and kind. She was the only one who treated me like I mattered, like I was more than my rank. And when the pack alpha tried to force her into a mating she didn't want, she refused. She stood before the whole pack and said no. What happened? They beat her, Brenna said flatly. The alpha and his sons. They beat her in front of everyone as punishment for disobedience. And I watched. We all watched. That's pack law. Submit or be broken. Nessa felt sick. She knew pack law could be harsh, but this sounded like cruelty. Marin died 3 days later, Brenna continued. From her injuries. And when I demanded justice, when I stood up and said the alpha had murdered her, they turned on me. They said I was insane, that I was challenging rank and order. They decided I was a threat that needed to be eliminated. So you ran. So I fought, Brenna corrected, and now her voice was steel. I killed 2 of the Alpha's sons. I scarred the Alpha himself. And then I ran, because even rage has limits, and I knew I couldn't defeat an entire pack alone. She fell silent, her story hanging in the air between them like smoke. Nessa didn't know what to say. This wasn't the monster the pack elders had described. This was a wolf who had survived something terrible, who had chosen freedom over submission even when that choice meant complete solitude. That's why you won't come back with us, Nessa said slowly. Why you won't join another pack? Because you've seen what packs can become. Because I've learned that I don't need a pack to survive, Brenna replied. I don't need their protection or their laws or their hierarchy. I am enough, alone. I hunt. I survive. I answer to no one but myself. But you're Omega, Nessa said, almost desperately. You're supposed to need the pack bond. It's in our nature. Brenna smiled again, that same small, enigmatic smile. Perhaps nature is more flexible than we're taught. Perhaps there are more ways to be a wolf than the packs allow. She stood then, the fish dangling from one hand. You should go back, young scout. Tell your elders what you've learned. Tell them that I mean them no harm as long as they leave me in peace. But if they send more hunters, more warriors with chains and cages, I will defend myself. And next time I may not be so gentle. What did you do with them? Nessa asked. The 12 hunters. Where did you send them? North, Brenna said. Through the high passes and down the far slopes. It's a 3-week journey back to your territory that way, twice as long as the direct route. They're unarmed but unharmed. Confused, angry, perhaps humiliated. But alive. That's more mercy than they intended to show me. She began to walk away, back toward her hidden shelter, then paused and looked back. You're different from the others, little scout. You came to watch, not to judge. You listened. There's wisdom in you, rare in one so young. Don't let your pack crush it out of you. And then she was gone, melting into the shadows between the trees as if she had never been there at all. Nessa stood alone in the gathering dark, her mind reeling. She had come seeking a monster and found something far more complex. A wolf who had chosen exile over submission. Who had turned weakness into strength by refusing to play by rules designed to keep her weak. She thought about her own pack, about Torvin's constant push for dominance, about the way certain wolves were always at the top and others always at the bottom. About the scouts who had died last autumn and the story the pack had been told about their deaths. Had it been the whole truth? Or just the truth the powerful wanted everyone to believe? Nessa made her way back to the clearing where she had camped the night before, questions multiplying in her mind like stars in the darkening sky. She had answers to bring back to Davrik and the council. But she wondered if they were the answers anyone wanted to hear. And she wondered what would happen when she told them. Nessa returned to Riverstone territory 5 days after she had left, arriving at dawn just as the pack was stirring. She was exhausted, hungry, and her mind still churned with everything she had learned. Davrik met her at the forest edge, his weathered face creased with relief. Thank the old spirits, he breathed. We thought perhaps you had met the same fate as the others. No, Nessa said quietly. I spoke with her. I watched her. I learned what you sent me to learn. Within the hour, the pack's council had assembled in the great meeting hall, a structure of stone and timber at the heart of the village. Torvin was there, of course, along with the other senior warriors and the elder council members. They sat in a circle, their faces grave, as Nessa stood in the center and told them everything. She described finding Brenna in the stream. The shelter with its shrine of bones. The Omega's scars and the fierce independence in her eyes. And most importantly, she told them Brenna's story, the abuse in her birth pack, her sister's death, her fight for freedom. She doesn't want war, Nessa concluded. She only wants to be left alone. She sent the hunters back alive, unharmed, just confused and humbled. She says if we leave her in peace, she'll do the same for us. Silence fell over the council hall. Nessa could see the elders exchanging glances, some troubled, some thoughtful. But it was Torvin who broke the quiet, his voice hard as granite. So we're to believe that an Omega, the lowest rank, somehow survived alone for years and defeated 12 of our finest warriors? And we're supposed to just accept this? Let her mock us and go unpunished? She didn't mock us, Nessa protested. She defended herself. There's a difference. She killed 3 of our scouts, Torvin shot back. That demands justice. She says they attacked her first, while she slept. That she acted in self-defense. And you believe her? Torvin stood now, his massive frame dominating the circle. You believe the word of a rogue Omega over your own pack members? Nessa felt her courage waver but forced herself to hold steady. I believe what I saw. She's not what we thought. She's not weak or broken or mad. She's just a wolf who wants to live free. Freedom without pack law is chaos, Torvin declared, looking around the circle at the other council members. If we allow one wolf to defy our authority, to live outside our rules, what message does that send? How long before others decide they don't need the pack either? Murmurs of agreement rippled through some of the warriors. But Davrik raised his hand, calling for quiet. The girl makes a fair point, the elder said slowly. Perhaps we have been too quick to judge. Perhaps there are circumstances we didn't fully understand. Circumstances? Torvin's voice dripped with contempt. An Omega refused to submit. An Omega killed our people. Those are the only circumstances that matter. But she's not our Omega, another elder spoke up, an old woman named Rilla with silver hair and keen eyes. She's not part of our pack. We have no jurisdiction over her. She lives in territory we claim, Torvin countered. That gives us jurisdiction. Do we claim the Whispering Valleys? Rilla challenged. When was the last time any of us hunted there? When was the last time we patrolled those boundaries? We avoid that place. We always have. It's been neutral ground for generations. Because no one lived there before, Torvin said through gritted teeth. Now someone does. Someone dangerous. Dangerous only to those who threaten her, Nessa interjected, finding her voice again. She could have killed our hunters. She didn't. That shows restraint, not savagery. Davrik nodded slowly. The girl is right. If Brenna wanted blood, we would be mourning 12 dead, not waiting for 12 confused warriors to find their way home. She showed mercy. Mercy? Torvin's laugh was bitter. She humiliated them. Stripped them of their armor and sent them on a 3-week march through the mountains. That's not mercy. That's psychological warfare. Or it's a warning, Davrik said quietly. A warning that she can defend herself but prefers not to kill. I think we should heed that warning and leave her be. The room erupted then, voices rising in argument. Some agreed with Davrik, arguing that the Whispering Valleys weren't worth the conflict. Others sided with Torvin, insisting that letting an Omega defy them would weaken the pack's authority. Nessa stood in the center of the chaos, watching wolves who had once seemed unified now split into factions. And she realized something troubling, this wasn't really about Brenna at all. It was about power. About who got to decide what was acceptable and what wasn't. About whether the pack could tolerate anyone living outside their control. Finally, Davrik stood, and his presence commanded silence. "We will put it to a vote," he announced. "All in favor of leaving the Omega in peace, of declaring the Whispering Valleys neutral territory, raise your hands." Hands went up. Nessa counted quickly. Nearly half the council. All opposed, Davrik continued. "Those who believe we should send a larger force to capture or eliminate the Omega." More hands. When Nessa counted, her heart sank. The vote was almost even, but the opposition had 3 more votes. "The council has decided," Davrik said heavily. "We will send another expedition." But, he raised his voice over the beginning protests, "this time it will not be a hunting party. It will be a diplomatic mission. We will send representatives to speak with her, to offer her a choice. Join our pack on her own terms, respecting her independence as much as possible, or face the consequences of continued defiance." "That's a fool's errand," Torvin muttered, but he didn't challenge the elders' ruling. "Who will go?" Rilla asked. Davrik looked at Nessa, and her stomach dropped. "The girl will go. She's already met Brenna, already established communication. And I will go with her." "You?" Torvin stared. "You're the council leader. If something happens to you, then you will lead in my place, as is your right," Davrik said calmly. "But I am still strong enough to walk, and I am wise enough to know when we need wisdom more than weapons. Nessa and I will go. We will speak with Brenna. We will try to find a path that doesn't end in more blood." The council meeting broke up shortly after, wolves drifting away in small groups, still arguing among themselves. Nessa found herself alone with Davrik in the emptying hall. "You don't have to do this," he told her gently. "I can find another guide." "No," Nessa said, surprised by her own certainty. "I need to do this. She trusted me enough to talk to me once. Maybe she will again." "You like her," Davrik observed, not unkindly. "The Omega. You sympathize with her." Nessa thought about that. Did she like Brenna? She wasn't sure. But she respected her. She saw in the Omega something that frightened and fascinated her in equal measure. The possibility of a different kind of strength. Not the strength of dominance or submission, but the strength of self-determination. "I think she deserves a chance," Nessa said finally. "I think she deserves to be heard, truly heard, not just judged by wolves who have never met her." Davrik smiled, a real smile this time, warm and sad. "You remind me of why I became an elder in the first place. To protect wolves like you, ones who still ask questions, who still see possibility where others see only threat." They left 2 days later, just the 2 of them. Davrik moved slowly but steadily, his old wolf legs still sure on the forest paths. Nessa led the way, following the route she had taken before, back into the Whispering Valleys. They traveled mostly in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. But on the second evening, as they made camp by a small stream, Davrik spoke. "I knew a wolf once, long ago, who left his pack to live alone," he said, his eyes distant with memory. "His name was Corin. He was alpha-born, strong and proud, meant to lead. But he hated the politics, the constant jockeying for position. He wanted simplicity. Peace." "What happened to him?" Nessa asked. "He survived 5 years alone," Davrik said quietly. "Then one winter, a hard winter, he got injured hunting. Broke his leg. He couldn't hunt, couldn't travel. When we found him, months later, he had starved to death in his den. Nessa felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. You're saying Brenna will die out here? That living alone is suicide. I'm saying it's dangerous, Davrik replied. Wolves are pack animals for good reason. We survive together. Alone, even the strongest eventually falls. But she survived so far. Years alone. She has, Davrik agreed. And that makes her remarkable. But remarkable doesn't mean invincible. Even she must know, deep down, that her luck won't hold forever. Maybe that's not the point, Nessa said slowly, working through her thoughts. Maybe she'd rather die free than live submitting to something she hates. Davrik looked at her for a long moment. Perhaps. But that would be a terrible waste. A wolf with her strength, her survival skills, her intelligence could do so much good in a pack. Could teach others. Could lead, even. Could threaten the existing order, Nessa said quietly. That's what Torvin is really afraid of, isn't it? Not that she'll kill anyone. But that she'll inspire others to question their place. To wonder if they have to accept the rank they're born into. Davrik didn't answer directly. But his silence was answer enough. They reached the Whispering Valleys the next day, and Nessa led Davrik to the clearing where she had first seen Brenna's shelter. But the shelter was gone. In its place was only trampled earth and scattered branches. She knew we were coming, Nessa whispered. Of course she did, a voice called from the trees above them. I can smell riverstone wolves 3 valleys away. They looked up to see Brenna perched on a thick branch, 20 feet above the ground. She looked different than Nessa remembered, her hair tied back, her expression harder, more guarded. She dropped lightly to the ground, landing in a crouch before rising to her full height. Her amber eyes fixed on Davrik, assessing. An elder. They sent you to negotiate. We came to talk, Davrik said carefully. To offer you options. Options. Brenna's laugh was sharp. Let me guess. Submit or die? Join us or face consequences, Davrik corrected. But not death. We're not monsters, despite what you might believe. No? Brenna circled them slowly, and Nessa noticed the way she moved, always keeping them both in sight, always maintaining escape routes. Tell me, Elder, what happens to wolves in your pack who refuse to accept their rank? Who challenged the hierarchy? Davrik hesitated, and Brenna pounced on that hesitation like prey. Exactly, she said. They're punished. Beaten into submission or exiled or worse. That's what pack law means. Control. Domination. The strong ruling the weak, generation after generation, and calling it natural order. It is natural order, Davrik replied, though his voice lacked conviction. It's how wolves survive. Structure. Organization. Everyone knowing their place. And what's my place? Brenna demanded, stepping closer, her voice rising. Tell me, Elder. In your pack, where would I fit? At the bottom, of course. Omega. The servant. The scapegoat. The wolf everyone can command and no one has to respect. That's what you're offering me. That's your option. We could, Davrik began, but Brenna cut him off. You could what? Make an exception? Give me special treatment? And what would that do to your precious hierarchy? What message would that send to every other low-ranking wolf who's ever wondered if they deserved better? She was right, Nessa realized. There was no place for Brenna in a traditional pack structure. She had gone too far, become too independent. She couldn't submit anymore even if she wanted to. And her very existence, her success alone, was a challenge to everything the pacts believed about strength and weakness. "Then what do you want?" Davrik asked, and for the first time, Nessa heard defeat in the old wolf's voice. "You can't live out here forever. You must know that." "Why not?" Brenna challenged. "I've done well enough so far. One bad winter. One serious injury. One moment of bad luck, and you'll die alone in these valleys." Davrik's voice was gentle now, almost pleading. "Is that really what you want? To have survived everything you've survived, only to end like that?" For a moment, something flickered across Brenna's face. Fear, perhaps. Or loneliness. But it was gone so quickly Nessa might have imagined it. "Better that than living on my knees," Brenna said quietly. "Better that than looking at wolves like Torvin every day and pretending I'm grateful for whatever scraps of dignity they deign to give me." "Then we're at an impasse," Davrik said sadly. "You won't join us. We can't leave you here forever without consequences. What solution is there?" Brenna was quiet for a long time, her gaze distant. When she spoke again, her voice was different. Thoughtful. "What if there was a third option?" she said slowly. "What if I'm not the only Omega who feels this way? What if there are others in your pack, in other packs, who chafe under the hierarchy but are too afraid to leave? What if they could see that another way is possible?" Nessa's breath caught. She understood immediately what Brenna was suggesting, and it was revolutionary. Dangerous. World-changing. "You want to start your own pack," she breathed. "A pack of Omegas." "Not Omegas," Brenna corrected, her eyes lighting up with the first real passion Nessa had seen in them. "Just wolves. Wolves who reject the ranking system entirely. Who choose to live as equals, working together not because of dominance and submission but because of mutual respect and shared purpose." Davrik stared at her as if she had grown a second head. "That's impossible. Wolves need hierarchy. It's in our blood." "Is it?" Brenna challenged. "Or is it just what we've been told for so long that we've forgotten how to imagine anything else? The old stories speak of packs from before the Great Wars, packs where wolves chose their roles based on skill and interest, not birth rank. What if we could reclaim that?" "It would never work," Davrik said, but he sounded uncertain now. "Conflict would arise. Without clear hierarchy, how would disputes be settled?" "Through discussion. Compromise. Democratic decision-making." Brenna's words came faster now, animated. "Yes, it would be harder than just having one alpha dictate everything. But it would also be fairer. More just. And wolves who felt heard and valued would be more loyal than ones forced to submit through fear." "The other packs would never allow it," Davrik said. "They would see you as a threat." "They already see me as a threat," Brenna pointed out. "At least this way, I wouldn't be alone. And neither would any wolf brave enough to join me." Nessa found herself speaking before she could stop herself. "I would." Both Brenna and Davrik turned to stare at her. Nessa felt her face flush but pushed on. "I would join you," she said to Brenna. "I'm not Omega, but I'm not high rank either. And I've seen enough of pack politics to know that something is broken in how we do things. If you're serious about building something different, something better, I want to be part of it." "Nessa," Davrik said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "You can't mean that." "Why not?" she challenged, surprising herself with her boldness. "You sent me to learn about her, to understand her." "Well, I did. And what I learned is that she's right. We do crush individuality. We do punish wolves for wanting something better than the rank they're born into. And maybe, just maybe, it's time someone tried a different way. You would leave your pack? Davrik asked. Your family? Everything you know? If I had to, Nessa said, though her heart ached at the thought. But maybe I wouldn't have to. Maybe others would come too. Maybe this could be the beginning of real change. Davrik looked between the two young wolves, his expression a mix of fear and something that might have been pride. You're both mad, he said finally. You're both going to get yourselves killed. But I can't stop you, can I? No, Brenna said gently. You can't. But you can help us. You can go back to Riverstone and tell them what we're doing. Tell them we're not a threat, just an alternative. Tell them any wolf who wants to join us is welcome, but we won't force anyone. And tell them that if they leave us in peace, we'll do the same for them. Torvin will never accept that, Davrik warned. He'll see this as rebellion. He'll want to crush it before it spreads. Then he'll try, Brenna said, and steel returned to her voice. And he'll fail, just like the 12 hunters failed. I won't be easy to kill, Elder. And with other wolves at my side, I'll be even harder. Davrik was quiet for a long time. Finally, he sighed, suddenly looking every one of his 70 winters. I'll deliver your message. I'll speak to the council, try to make them understand. But Nessa, if you do this, there's no going back. You'll be declaring yourself outside pack law. You'll be exiled. I understand, Nessa said, though her voice shook slightly. And you, Davrik turned to Brenna. If you fail, if this experiment of yours collapses, don't expect us to welcome you back. You'll be on your own again, but this time, you'll have dragged others down with you. I won't fail, Brenna said simply. Because failure isn't an option. Too many wolves have suffered under the current system. Too many have been beaten down, told they're worthless, forced to submit or die. It's time for something new. It's time for something better. She extended her hand to Nessa, human fashion, and after only a moment's hesitation, Nessa took it. Their palms pressed together, sealing a pact that would change both their lives forever. Davrik watched this exchange with sad eyes. Then he turned and began walking back the way they had come, his steps heavy. Elder, Brenna called after him. Thank you. For coming. For listening. For giving us a chance. He paused but didn't turn around. Don't thank me yet. You have no idea what you've started. And then he was gone, disappearing into the trees. Nessa and Brenna stood alone in the clearing, suddenly very aware of the enormity of what they had just done. Then Brenna laughed, a genuine sound of joy and disbelief. Well, she said. I guess we'd better figure out how to actually build this pack of ours. I guess we better, Nessa agreed, and despite her fear, despite her uncertainty, she felt a thrill of excitement. They were going to try something impossible. And maybe, just maybe, they would succeed. Word spread through the Riverstone pack like fire through dry grass. Nessa had joined the Rogue Omega. Davrik had returned alone, bringing news of rebellion and revolution. The pack fractured overnight, arguments breaking out in every den and gathering place. Torvin, as expected, was furious. He called for an immediate war party, demanding they march on the Whispering Valleys and end this madness before it could spread. But Davrik, using every ounce of authority his position held, blocked him. We gave our word, the elder insisted. We told them if they left us in peace, we would do the same. I will not break a promise. She's stealing our pack members. Torvin roared. How is that leaving us in peace? She's not stealing anyone, Davrik replied calmly. Wolves are choosing to leave. There's a difference. Because others did leave. 3 days after Nessa's defection, 2 more wolves made the journey to the Whispering Valleys. Then 5 more. Then a dozen. Most were low-ranking, omegas and subordinates who had lived their entire lives at the bottom of the hierarchy. But a few were mid-rank wolves, competent hunters, and scouts who simply wanted something different. Within a month, Brenna's camp had grown to 30 wolves. Within 2 months, 50. They came from Riverstone and from other packs too, word spreading through the territories like seeds on the wind. There's a place where rank doesn't matter. There's a place where wolves are treated as equals. And in the Whispering Valleys, Brenna and Nessa worked tirelessly to make that promise real. It was harder than either of them had imagined. Wolves raised in hierarchical packs didn't know how to function without clear leadership. They looked to Brenna to make decisions, to give orders, to be the alpha even though she insisted she wasn't. We vote on important matters, Brenna explained to a group of newcomers on a cold morning, her breath misting in the air. Everyone gets a voice. Everyone's opinion counts equally. But what if we can't agree? Asked Tove, a former Omega from a Pack 3 territories north. She was a small wolf with quick eyes and a nervous manner. Then we discuss until we find common ground, Brenna said patiently. Or we compromise. Or we find a solution no one's thought of yet. That sounds slow, observed Kale, a former beta who had joined them 2 weeks ago. He was older, scarred from many fights, and clearly struggling with the lack of clear authority. It is slow, Nessa agreed. She had become Brenna's second, though neither of them used that term. They simply worked together, 2 voices among many, trying to build something new. But it's also more thoughtful. Decisions made by 50 wolves will be better than decisions made by 1, even if they take longer. The first major test came during a particularly harsh snowfall. Food was scarce, and they needed to organize hunting parties. In a traditional pack, the alpha would simply assign roles. But here, they had to figure it out together. They gathered in the largest shelter they had built, a communal space constructed from logs and branches, insulated with moss and mud. 50 wolves in human form, sitting in a rough circle, their voices rising and falling as they debated. The deer are moving to lower ground, Kale reported. He had been scouting for 3 days. If we're going to catch them, we need to move now. How many hunters? Tove asked. 20 at least, Kale said. Maybe more. The herds are large but scattered. That's nearly half our wolves, another voice objected. What about security here? What if another pack decides to raid us while our hunters are gone? The nearest pack is 2 days' travel, Nessa pointed out. We'd have warning. Unless they send scouts ahead, Kale countered. Like we would. The discussion went on for hours, voices sometimes raised in frustration, sometimes quiet with thought. Brenna watched and listened, only occasionally interjecting to keep things civil, to remind them they were working toward a common goal. Finally, they reached a solution. They would send 15 hunters, keeping 35 in camp. The hunters would split into 3 groups, covering more ground, and they would use signal horns to communicate, able to recall each other quickly if needed. It wasn't perfect, but it was a plan everyone could live with. The hunt was successful. They brought back enough meat to feed the camp for a week. And more importantly, they had done it together, through cooperation rather than command. But not everything went smoothly. There were arguments, sometimes bitter ones. Wolves who had been beaten down for years sometimes swung too far the other way, becoming aggressive and domineering themselves. Others struggled with the lack of structure, becoming anxious and uncertain without clear orders to follow. Brenna and Nessa found themselves playing mediator more often than they'd expected, helping wolves work through conflicts, reminding them that freedom came with responsibility. One evening, Nessa found Brenna sitting alone by the stream where they had first met, staring at the water as it rushed over stones. "Having second thoughts?" Nessa asked, settling beside her. "Every day," Brenna admitted quietly. "What if we're wrong, Nessa? What if wolves really do need hierarchy? What if all we're doing is creating chaos that will eventually collapse and hurt everyone involved?" "We're not wrong," Nessa said firmly. "Look at what we've built in just 2 months. 50 wolves living together, working together, without a single wolf being beaten or exiled or forced into submission. That's not nothing. It's also not sustainable," Brenna said. 50 wolves we can manage. But what happens when it's 100? 200? How do you maintain equality and democracy with numbers that large? "The same way any community does," Nessa replied. "With subgroups, representatives, systems of communication. It will be complicated, yes. But complicated doesn't mean impossible." Brenna smiled wearily. "When did you become the optimistic one?" "When I met a stubborn Omega who convinced me that impossible things were worth trying," Nessa said, nudging her shoulder. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the stream and the distant sounds of the camp behind them. Voices raised in laughter. Someone singing. The normal sounds of wolves living together. "I got a message today," Brenna said finally. "From Davrik. He sent it through one of the new arrivals." "What did it say?" "That Torvin is planning something. That he's been meeting with other pack leaders, building alliances. That he's convinced them our way of life is a threat that needs to be eliminated." Nessa felt her stomach clench. "War. Maybe," Brenna said. "Or maybe just enough pressure to make us collapse on our own. Either way, Davrik warned us to be ready. Are we ready?" Brenna looked at her, amber eyes reflecting the fading sunset. "No. But we will be. Because we have to be. Too many wolves are counting on us now. We can't fail them." Over the following weeks, they prepared. Not for offense, but for defense. They established watch rotations, trained wolves in basic fighting techniques, created evacuation plans in case they were overrun. But they also continued building, continued growing, continued proving that their way of life could work. One of the most surprising additions to their ranks arrived on a cold morning in late winter. Davrik himself, the old elder from Riverstone, walking slowly into their camp with a small pack slung over his shoulder. Brenna and Nessa rushed to meet him, both surprised and delighted. "Elder," Brenna said. "What are you doing here?" "Joining you, if you'll have me," Davrik replied, his eyes twinkling. "I'm too old to change the Riverstone pack from within. But I'm not too old to help build something new." "What about the council?" Nessa asked. "Your position?" "I resigned," Davrik said simply. "Torvin is council leader now. He'll likely march on you within the month. I thought you could use whatever wisdom these old bones still hold." They welcomed him, of course. And his presence brought a gravitas to their community, a sense that what they were doing wasn't just youthful rebellion but something deeper, something that even the wise and old could see value in. True to Davrik's prediction, Torvin came with the first thaw of spring. But he didn't come with an army. He came with 20 warriors and a white flag of truce. Brenna met him at the edge of their territory, with Nessa and 10 of their best fighters at her back. The two groups faced each other across 50 paces of muddy ground, tension thick enough to cut. "Torvin," Brenna called out. "You come under a flag of peace. State your business." The big warrior looked different than Nessa remembered. Older, more tired. The weight of leadership sat heavy on his shoulders. "I come to offer terms," Torvin said, his voice carrying across the distance. "You've built something here, Omega. Something that threatens the stability of every pack in the region. We can't allow it to continue." "Can't?" Brenna's voice was steel. "Or won't? Does it matter?" Torvin countered. "The result is the same. You disband peacefully, return to your original packs, and no blood is shed. Refuse, and we will disband you by force." "You tried force before," Brenna reminded him. "It didn't go well for you." "That was 12 hunters," Torvin said. "This time I have commitments from 5 packs. Over 300 warriors. You have what, 60 wolves? 70? Most of them former Omegas with no combat training? You cannot win this fight." "Maybe not," Brenna agreed. "But we can make it costly enough that you'll wish you'd left us alone. How many mothers will weep for sons who died trying to force wolves back into submission? How many children will grow up without fathers, all because you couldn't tolerate wolves living differently than you?" Torvin's jaw clenched. "This isn't about intolerance. It's about survival. The pack system has kept our kind alive for 1,000 years. You threaten to tear that down." "We threaten nothing," Nessa spoke up, stepping forward. "We're not trying to destroy other packs. We're just offering an alternative for wolves who want it." "Why is that so threatening?" "Because it's a lie," Torvin said, and there was real pain in his voice now. "You promise equality and freedom, but what happens when reality hits? When food is scarce and decisions need to be made quickly? When danger comes and someone needs to lead? Your system will collapse, and all these wolves you've gathered will suffer for your foolish idealism." "Or," Davrick's voice rang out as the old wolf stepped forward, "it will succeed, and wolves everywhere will realize there are other ways to live. Other ways to organize themselves. And that terrifies you, doesn't it, Torvin? Not that we'll fail, but that we'll succeed." The war leader stared at his former council elder, betrayal written across his face. "You were supposed to be wise, old wolf. You were supposed to guide us." "I am guiding you," Davrick replied gently. "I'm guiding you toward the future instead of clinging to the past. But you have to be willing to see it." Torvin was silent for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "I have my orders. I have my obligations. Disband peacefully, or face the consequences." "Then come," Brenna said quietly. "Bring your 300 warriors. Attack us in our valley. But know this, we will defend ourselves. We will fight for our right to exist. And even if you win, even if you kill us all, the idea will survive. Other wolves will hear our story. They'll wonder if we were right. They'll question their own packs, their own ranks. You can't kill an idea with swords and spears, Torvin. You can only prove you're afraid of it." The two leaders stared at each other across the muddy ground. Then Torvin turned without another word and led his warriors away. That night, the camp was somber. Everyone knew war was coming. Everyone knew many of them might die. But no one left. They had found something worth fighting for. Something worth dying for, if necessary. The right to choose their own path. The right to live as equals rather than in a hierarchy that crushed more wolves than it elevated. Brenna stood before them that evening, beside the communal fire, and spoke to the gathered wolves. "I won't lie to you," she said, her voice carrying in the still night air. "What's coming will be hard. Many of us may not survive. If anyone wants to leave, to return to their old packs, now is the time. No one will judge you. No one will think less of you." She paused, letting that offer sink in. No one moved. "But if you stay," Brenna continued, "if you stand with us, know that you're fighting for something bigger than yourself. You're fighting for every Omega who's ever been beaten down. Every subordinate who's ever been told they don't matter. Every wolf who's ever looked at the hierarchy and wondered if there was a better way. We are their hope. We are proof that another path exists. And that's worth any price." A howl rose from the crowd then, one voice joining another and another until the entire valley rang with the sound. 65 wolves, calling their defiance to the night sky. Calling their readiness for whatever came next. They came at dawn, 3 days later. 300 warriors from 5 different packs, moving through the forest like a dark tide. They had planned their approach carefully, surrounding the valley from all sides, cutting off escape routes. But Brenna's pack was ready. They had spent the 3 days preparing, not for victory but for survival. They had hidden the elders and young in deep caves, provisioned and guarded. They had set traps along the approaches, simple but effective pitfalls and tangling vines. They had chosen defensive positions, places where numbers would matter less and terrain would favor them. And they had made peace with the possibility of death. Nessa stood on a rocky outcrop overlooking the main approach to their camp, watching the enemy force advance. She was in her wolf form, russet fur bristling, her heart pounding but her mind clear. Around her, 10 other wolves waited, all of them former scouts, chosen for this position because of their speed and agility. Their job wasn't to win. It was to delay. The attacking force hit their first line of traps, and howls of surprise and pain echoed through the trees. Warriors fell into concealed pits, others found their legs tangled in cunningly woven vines. The advance slowed, became more cautious. Nessa's group attacked then, darting in from their elevated position, snapping at legs and throats before retreating. Hit and run. Guerrilla tactics that larger packs rarely bothered to learn because they relied on overwhelming force. But overwhelming force was hard to bring to bear in dense forest, on unfamiliar terrain, against opponents who knew every stone and stream. The battle raged for hours. Brenna led the defense from the heart of their camp, her group holding the main shelters, refusing to give ground. She fought with a ferocity born of desperation, her fangs and claws painting the ground red, her howls rallying her pack whenever they faltered. Davrik, despite his age, coordinated the defensive lines, calling out warnings, directing reinforcements where they were needed most. His tactical mind, honed over decades, proved invaluable. But the numbers were overwhelming. For every attacking wolf they drove back, 2 more took their place. They were being pushed back, inch by bloody inch, toward the center of their camp. Nessa's group had taken casualties. 3 wolves down, 1 dead. She could feel her strength waning, her movements growing slower. They couldn't win this. They all knew it. But they could make the cost steep. They could make the attackers remember. That's when the hell came. Not from within the valley, but from outside it. From the east, where no one had expected anything. New wolves poured into the valley. 50 of them, then 100, then more. They wore no pack colors, carried no banners. They were wolves from a dozen different territories, lone wolves, and small families who had heard about what Brenna was building and had come to see if it was real. They had arrived to find it under attack. And without discussion, without coordination, they joined the defense. The tide began to turn. The attacking force, already weary from hours of fighting, suddenly found themselves facing fresh opponents. Confusion spread through their ranks. Torvin's voice could be heard shouting orders, trying to maintain cohesion, but it was too late. The attackers began to retreat, first in small groups, then in a general withdrawal. They left their wounded behind, carried their dead, and melted back into the forest from which they had come. Silence fell over the valley. A terrible silence, broken only by the moans of injured wolves and the ragged breathing of those still standing. Nessa shifted back to human form, her body aching, her clothes torn and bloody. She limped down from her rocky outcrop to find Brenna in the center of camp, surrounded by wounded wolves, her hands already working to bind injuries and comfort the dying. Their eyes met across the bloody ground, and no words were needed. They had survived. They had won. But the cost had been high. They spent the next week tending to wounds and counting losses. 12 of their wolves had died, with 20 more seriously injured. But they had also gained nearly 150 new members, the wolves who had arrived in their darkest hour and chosen to stay. The valley was crowded now. Over 200 wolves trying to find space, to organize, to heal. It should have been chaos. And in some ways, it was. But it was also the most beautiful thing Nessa had ever seen. Wolves from different packs, different backgrounds, working together. Former alphas binding the wounds of former omegas. Warriors and scouts and hunters and healers, all contributing what they could, all treated with equal respect and gratitude. This was what they had been fighting for. This moment, this community, this proof that wolves didn't need hierarchy to cooperate. They just needed a reason to care about each other. Torvin never came back. But a messenger did, 10 days after the battle. A young wolf carrying a letter sealed with the mark of the Riverstone Pack. Davrik read it aloud to the assembled community. To the wolves of the Whispering Valleys. The Council of 5 Packs has met and voted. Your right to exist as an independent community is hereby recognized. The Whispering Valleys and the territories immediately surrounding them are declared neutral ground, under your jurisdiction. This recognition comes with conditions. You will not actively recruit from other packs. Wolves who wish to join you must come of their own accord. You will not expand beyond the designated neutral zone. You will respect the borders and laws of neighboring packs, as we will respect yours. Break these terms, and we will consider you hostile. Torvin, Council Leader, Riverstone Pack. Silence followed the reading. Then someone laughed, a sound of pure joy and relief. Others joined in, and soon the entire valley rang with laughter and celebration. They had done it. Against all odds, against overwhelming force, against centuries of tradition, they had won not just a battle but recognition. They had earned the right to exist. That night, they built a massive fire in the center of camp and celebrated. Wolves danced and sang and told stories. They mourned their dead and honored their wounded. They looked around at the faces lit by firelight and saw not ranks or hierarchies, but simply pack. Their pack. Brenna found Nessa sitting slightly apart from the celebration, looking up at the stars. She settled beside her, and for a while, they just sat in comfortable silence. "Thank you," Brenna said finally. "For what?" "For believing in this when it was just a crazy idea. For standing beside me when it meant giving up everything you knew. For being the first wolf brave enough to say yes. Nessa smiled. I think you would have done it without me. You're too stubborn to quit. Maybe, Brenna agreed. But it would have been lonely. And scary. Having you there made all the difference. They sat watching the celebration, listening to the joy of wolves who had found a home, a purpose, a place where they could be themselves. What happens now? Nessa asked. We have recognition, but we also have 200 wolves and limited territory. We can't hunt these valleys forever without depleting the game. We can't grow much bigger without pushing into other territories. I know, Brenna said quietly. But those are problems for tomorrow. Tonight, let's just enjoy what we've accomplished. Fair enough, Nessa agreed. But both of them knew that this was just the beginning. They had proven that wolves could live differently, could organize without hierarchy, could survive and even thrive outside traditional pack structure. Now they had to prove they could sustain it. That this wasn't just a beautiful experiment that would collapse under its own weight. It would be hard. It would require wisdom and patience and constant work. But as Brenna looked around at the wolves celebrating in the firelight, at the community they had built from nothing, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not just for herself, but for every wolf who had ever wondered if they deserved better. Every Omega who had been beaten down. Every subordinate who had been told they didn't matter. This was for them. This was proof that another way was possible. And that was worth any struggle that lay ahead. Spring turned to summer in the Whispering Valleys, and the community continued to grow. Not in numbers now, the neutral zone could barely support the 200 wolves they already had, but in depth, in sophistication, in the 1,000 small ways that turn a camp into a home. They built more permanent structures, houses of timber and stone that would last through harsh winters. They established formal councils, representatives chosen by their peers to help coordinate the community's efforts. They created systems for managing resources, for resolving disputes, for making decisions that affected everyone. It wasn't perfect. There were still arguments, still conflicts, still moments when the lack of clear hierarchy caused confusion or frustration. But slowly, painfully, they learned to navigate these challenges without resorting to dominance and submission. One afternoon, Nessa sat with Davrik by the stream, watching the water flow over familiar stones. The old wolf had aged noticeably since joining them, the stress and physical demands of the battle taking their toll. But his mind remained sharp, and his counsel was sought often. "Do you think we'll last?" Nessa asked him. 10 years from now, 20, will this community still exist? Or will it collapse like Torvin predicted? Davrik was quiet for a long time, watching the water dance. "I think," he said finally, "that you've already succeeded in the way that matters most. You've proven that the idea can work. That wolves can organize differently. Even if this specific community fails, even if circumstances beyond your control tear it apart, the knowledge that it's possible will endure. Other wolves will try. They'll learn from your successes and your failures. They'll build on what you've started. So we're just the first attempt?" Nessa asked, not sure how she felt about that. "You're the proof of concept," Davrik replied. "The bridge between what was and what could be. That's more important than you realize." Over the summer, something unexpected happened. Wolf packs began sending representatives to visit, not to threaten or demand, but simply to observe. They watched how Brenna's community functioned, how decisions were made, how conflicts were resolved. Some visitors left disgusted, convinced that what they were seeing was chaos waiting to collapse. Others left thoughtful, troubled, seeing merit in what had been built but uncertain how it would translate to their own packs. And a few left inspired, returning to their home territories to advocate for changes, for reforms, for a loosening of the strict hierarchies that had governed wolf society for generations. One visitor who came that summer was Torvin himself. He arrived alone, without ceremony, on a hot afternoon when most of the camp was resting in the shade. Brenna met him at the edge of their territory, her expression guarded but not hostile. They stood facing each other, these two wolves who had nearly gone to war, and the silence stretched between them like a taut rope. "I came to see for myself," Torvin said finally. "To understand what I tried to destroy." "And what do you see?" Brenna asked. Torvin looked past her at the camp visible through the trees. Wolves in human form working together, building, talking, laughing. Children playing without fear. Elders being cared for with genuine respect rather than grudging obligation. "I see something I don't entirely understand," he admitted. "But I also see something that works, at least for now. And I see wolves who believe in what they're building." "Is that why you came? To admit you were wrong?" "I came," Torvin said slowly, "because things are changing in Riverstone. Since the battle, since we recognized your right to exist, there have been questions. Debates. Wolves wondering if rank has to mean what it's always meant. Some of our Omegas have asked for more voice in pact decisions. Some of our subordinates have refused orders they thought were unjust. And you want me to tell them to stop?" Brenna asked, a hint of challenge in her voice. "No," Torvin said, surprising her. "I want to know how you make it work. How you maintain order without hierarchy. How you resolve conflicts without someone having final authority. Because I'm starting to think that what we have in Riverstone, what all the traditional pacts have, it's breaking. It worked for our ancestors, maybe. But the world is changing. Wolves are changing. And I need to change with it, or I'll lose everything." Brenna studied him for a long moment, seeing the genuine confusion and concern in his eyes. This was not the arrogant war leader who had threatened them months ago. This was a wolf struggling to lead his pack through uncertain times. "Walk with me," she said finally. "I'll show you how we do things. But I warn you, there are no easy answers. No simple solutions you can take back and implement overnight. What we've built here required sacrifice and patience and a willingness to fail and try again. It required wolves being brave enough to be vulnerable with each other." They spent the afternoon walking through the camp, Brenna explaining their systems, introducing Torvin to wolves from different backgrounds who spoke honestly about the challenges and rewards of their new way of life. She showed him their council meetings, where decisions were debated openly. She showed him their conflict resolution process, where both sides were heard before solutions were sought. Torvin listened, asked questions, and slowly his expression changed from skepticism to something like wonder. "This shouldn't work," he said as the sun began to set. "By everything I was taught, everything I believed, this should have collapsed into chaos months ago." "But it didn't," Brenna said simply. "Because wolves are more adaptable than we give ourselves credit for. Because rank is learned behavior, not instinct. And because when wolves feel valued and heard, they don't need dominance to keep them in line." Torvin was quiet for a long time. Finally he said, "I can't promise Riverstone will change overnight. There are traditions going back generations. Wolves who believe deeply in the old ways. But I will start conversations. I will ask questions. And I will remember what I've seen here. That's all I ask," Brenna said. "Change doesn't happen through force or decree. It happens through choice, one wolf at a time." Torvin left as quietly as he had come, but something had shifted. The leader of the pack that had once tried to destroy them had left as an ally, if not a friend. As autumn painted the valley in gold and crimson, Nessa found herself thinking often about the future. They had survived their first year, proven their concept, earned recognition from neighboring packs. But what came next? She raised these questions one evening as the community gathered for their weekly council meeting. 200 wolves sitting in a vast circle, ready to discuss the week's business and make decisions that would affect them all. "We've been focused on survival," Nessa said when it was her turn to speak. "On proving we could exist. But I think it's time we asked ourselves a deeper question: what do we want to become? What's our purpose beyond just being different from traditional packs?" The question sparked hours of discussion. Some wolves argued they should focus on growth, on spreading their message to more territories. Others said they should deepen what they had, perfect their systems before expanding. Still others suggested they had a responsibility to help reform existing packs rather than simply offering an alternative. Brenna listened to all of it, adding her thoughts occasionally but mostly letting the community shape its own vision. This was the heart of what they had built, not one wolf deciding for all, but all wolves deciding together. Finally, as the moon rose high overhead and voices began to tire, a young wolf named Fen, barely 18 winters, stood to speak. He had joined them 3 months ago, an Omega fleeing abuse in his birth pack. "I think," he said quietly, "that our purpose is to remember. To remember that every wolf matters. That rank at birth doesn't determine worth. That strength comes in many forms, not just dominance and submission. If we can keep remembering that, keep living that truth, then everything else will follow naturally." Silence greeted his words, but it was a good silence, thoughtful and profound. Then Davrik began to clap, a human gesture, and others joined until the entire circle was applauding the young wolf's wisdom. "Then that's what we'll do," Brenna said when the applause faded. "We'll remember. We'll live our truth as best we can. And we'll welcome any wolf who wants to learn how to live it with us." The meeting ended shortly after, wolves dispersing to their homes and dens. But Nessa stayed behind with Brenna, the two of them remaining by the dying fire. "Do you ever regret it?" Nessa asked. "Choosing this path? All the struggle and uncertainty and responsibility?" Brenna smiled, gazing into the embers. "Every day," she admitted. "But I also wouldn't change it. I spent 20 years of my life being told I didn't matter, that my only value was in submission and service. Now I wake up every morning knowing I matter because I exist, not because of my rank or my usefulness to some hierarchy. That freedom, Nessa, that dignity, it's worth any price." "Even loneliness?" Nessa asked softly. "You saved all these wolves, gave them a home and a purpose. But sometimes I watch you, and you still seem alone. Like there's a part of yourself you keep separate." Brenna was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know how to be close to wolves anymore. Not really. The pack that raised me taught me that closeness meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant pain. I know intellectually that this community is different, that these wolves care about me. But there's a wall inside me, built over years of survival, and I don't know how to tear it down." "You don't have to tear it down all at once," Nessa said gently. "Maybe just make a door. Let a few wolves in. Start small." Brenna looked at her young friend, seeing the wisdom that had grown in her over these challenging months. "How did you get so smart?" "I learned from a stubborn Omega who taught me that impossible things were worth trying," Nessa replied with a grin. They sat together in comfortable silence as the fire died to coals and the night deepened around them. Two wolves who had changed the world, at least their small corner of it, and who carried the weight of that change in different ways. The following spring brought new challenges. A severe drought dried up many of the streams, making water scarce. A late frost killed much of the new plant growth, which meant less food for prey animals, which meant harder hunting. And with 200 mouths to feed, every shortage was magnified. The community came together to face these challenges, rationing carefully, organizing larger hunting parties to range farther afield, digging wells to access deeper water sources. It was hard, grueling work, and there were moments when tempers flared and old hierarchical thinking crept back in. But they persevered. They remembered their purpose. They remembered that they were building something worth protecting. And then, just when the drought seemed endless, the rains came. Gentle at first, then stronger, soaking into the parched earth, filling the streams, bringing life back to the valley. The community celebrated that night with singing and dancing and stories. They had survived another test, grown stronger through adversity. Brenna stood at the edge of the celebration, watching her pack, this impossible family she had helped create. She saw former alphas dancing with former omegas. She saw wolves from a dozen different birth packs mingling as if they had known each other all their lives. She saw children playing without fear of punishment for breaking some unspoken rule of rank. This was what she had fought for. This moment, repeated in 1,000 small ways every day. Wolves living as equals, supporting each other not out of obligation or fear, but out of genuine care and respect. Nessa found her there, as she often did, and they stood together watching the joy they had helped create. There will be more challenges, Nessa said. Harder ones, probably. I know, Brenna replied. Other packs might decide we're a threat again. Resources will always be limited. Conflicts will arise that test our principles. I know, Brenna said again. But we'll face them together, Nessa finished. All of us. And we'll find solutions together. Because that's what we do. Brenna smiled, a real smile, full and genuine. Yes, she said. That's what we do. The years that followed were not easy, but they were rich with meaning. The Whispering Valleys community became a beacon for wolves across many territories. Some came to join, others just to visit and learn. Some traditional packs began implementing reforms, loosening their strict hierarchies, giving more voice to lower-ranking wolves. It wasn't a revolution, not in the dramatic sense. It was something quieter but perhaps more profound, an evolution. A slow shift in how wolves thought about themselves and each other. Brenna never became an alpha, though many wolves urged her to accept the title. She remained simply Brenna, one voice among many, though certainly a respected and influential one. She taught young wolves to hunt, to survive, to think for themselves. She mediated conflicts and offered counsel when asked. But she never commanded, never dominated, never demanded submission. And slowly, painfully, she began to let wolves get close. She formed friendships, genuine bonds not based on rank or utility but on mutual respect and affection. She learned to trust again, in small increments, building that door Nessa had spoken of years before. Davrik passed peacefully in his sleep 5 years after joining them, surrounded by wolves who honored him not as an elder in the hierarchical sense, but as a teacher, a mentor, a friend. His funeral was attended by wolves from a dozen different packs, all of them touched by his wisdom and kindness. Nessa grew into a formidable leader in her own right, though she too rejected formal titles. She became known throughout the territories as a voice of reason, a bridge between traditional packs and the new way. She traveled often, visiting other communities, sharing what they had learned, learning from others in turn. And on a summer evening, 10 years after that first meeting by the stream, Brenna stood on the same rocky outcrop where Nessa had once held off an invading army. The valley below was alive with activity, 300 wolves now, maybe more, the territory having been expanded twice through negotiations with neighboring packs. She thought about the Omega she had been, beaten and broken, fleeing into wilderness to escape certain death. She thought about the wolf she had become, scarred but strong, surrounded by community, part of something larger than herself. She thought about Marin, her sister, dead these many years. And she whispered to the wind, "We did it, sister. We built something better. We proved that strength doesn't require dominance, that wolves can choose to be equals. I wish you could see it." Nessa climbed up to join her, moving more slowly now, her own years of hard work showing in premature gray around her muzzle. "Thinking deep thoughts?" she asked. "Thinking about how far we've come," Brenna replied. "And how much farther we have to go." "There will always be farther to go," Nessa said philosophically. "That's the nature of growth. But look at what we've accomplished. Look at what we've proven is possible. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had just submitted?" Brenna asked. "If I had returned to Riverstone that first time, accepted my place in their hierarchy? Would I be alive today? Would any of this exist?" "You would probably be alive," Nessa said honestly. "But you wouldn't be living. There's a difference. And this," she gestured at the valley below, "would never have existed. All these wolves would still be trapped in systems that diminished them. So no, I don't wonder what would have happened. I'm grateful for what did happen." Brenna nodded, accepting the wisdom in her friend's words. They stood together as the sun set, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber, watching wolves move through their evening routines, preparing meals, telling stories, living their lives in freedom and dignity. This was not the end of their story. There would be more challenges, more growth, more evolution. The world was changing, and wolves were changing with it. Traditional packs were slowly reforming, adopting some of the principles that had been proven in the Whispering Valleys. Some stubbornly clung to the old ways, and that was their right. But even among those packs, young wolves were asking questions, wondering about alternatives. Change was happening. Slow, difficult, imperfect change, but change nonetheless. And it had started with one Omega who refused to submit. Who chose exile over oppression. Who proved that weakness was not destiny, that rank was not worth, that wolves could be more than the boxes their society tried to force them into. The pack had sent their best hunters to capture the Omega. She had sent back their armor and a warning. But more than that, she had sent back a message, that dignity could not be taken by force, that freedom was worth fighting for, and that sometimes, the lowest-ranked wolf in the hierarchy was actually the bravest one in the forest. As darkness fell over the Whispering Valleys, lights began to appear in windows and around cooking fires. The sounds of conversation and laughter drifted up to where Brenna and Nessa stood. The sounds of home. Of family. Of wolves who had chosen to build something better together. And in that moment, standing beside her oldest friend, watching over the community they had built through courage and sacrifice and stubborn hope, Brenna felt something she had never truly felt before. Peace. Not the peace of safety or security, those were always temporary. But the peace of purpose fulfilled. The peace of knowing that her life, her struggles, her choices, they had mattered. They had made a difference. She had been born an Omega, the lowest of the low. But she had become something far more important, herself. Fully, completely, unapologetically herself. And that was the greatest victory of all. "Come on," Nessa said, tugging at her sleeve. "They're starting the evening meal." And I heard Finn caught a wild boar today. If we don't hurry, the young ones will eat it all. Brenna laughed, a sound of genuine joy, and let herself be pulled down from the outcrop toward the lights and warmth below. Toward home. Toward pack. Toward the future they had fought so hard to create. A future where every wolf mattered. Where rank was choice, not destiny. Where strength came in many forms, and all of them were valued. It wasn't perfect. It would never be perfect. But it was real, and it was theirs, and it was worth every sacrifice they had made to build it. The Omega had sent back armor and a warning. But she had given the world so much more. She had given it hope. And hope, once kindled, is impossible to extinguish.